This episode is supported by the Starz limited series Mary and George, the scandalous true story starring Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine. See why Salon calls it a lusty, wickedly fun gallop through history. For your Emmy consideration, visit starsfyc.com for more information. Welcome back to the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am Katey Rich. I'm the awards editor here at The Ankler. And this week, my co-host is The Ankler's series business columnist, renowned tennis aficionado, Elaine Low. Hi, Elaine.
Hi. I appreciate the double title. That is accurate.
Yeah. I feel like people just need to get to know you right away. And unfortunately, my tennis knowledge kind of begins and ends at challengers. So I can't razz you any further about your sport of choice. But we'll always have challengers.
Oh, I loved that movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hang on. You'll come back later in the year when we get to where we're like talking about Oscar buzz and I'm like insisting that Josh O'Connor should win every award. We'll be back to get to do the deep dive. Later in this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Seth Meyers, whose show Late Night with Seth Meyers has been on for 10 years as of this year, but only has 2 Emmy nominations. We intend to change that with today's really lovely interview. But first, Elaine, we're going to dive into the Emmys race from the perspective where we're kind of meeting in the middle. You've been doing all this reporting about the future of television. I'm covering all these Emmy shows that, were developed 1, 2, 3 years ago, all of them in this kind of pre-strike market that more or less no longer exists based on what I'm reading from your reporting. So I'm going to ask you if there's anything we can learn from what's actually up in the Emmys race, or if this is all just like a relic of a star that's exploded ever since these shows were broadcast into television.
That's so funny because that is kind of when we look at TV and film, how it works, right? You're looking at light that has traveled so far from the past that you're watching a star that died 100 years ago. Yeah. And you're finally getting to see the Nicole Kidman limited series that came out of that dying star.
Yeah, it's when you get to the shows like Expats that you're mentioning there, or like Shogun, that were really hampered by the pandemic. You're like, oh, wow, okay, they've been going on for a while if like all the production photos are of everyone wearing masks.
Nice to get a glimpse of development from 2019.
So before we dive into that, just to update everyone on the calendar, Emmy eligibility is officially over. All shows have to be done by May 31st. That's a relatively new rule. So anything that's airing right now is actually not eligible till next go round. That includes Bridgerton, which I do feel like has been on a real upswing with this season. But it's got a whole second half of the season coming later this year. So stay tuned for that in 2025. Emmy ballots still are 10 days away. They come out on June 13th. So we'll dive into them then. But for now, the gates are closed. Elaine, do you watch Bridgerton? Is this something that I need to finally get myself into?
I'm glad you brought that up, Katey. Actually, in, 2022, I think when they were doing this series of Bridgerton balls that Netflix had put on, I told my friend, who was a very talented costume designer, I was like, I'm thinking about going to one of these Bridgerton balls. And she goes, well, if you're going to a ball, I have to make you a dress. And so my friend made me a historically accurate Regency era Bridgerton dress to wear to this thing. And I was over the moon. So that gives you some idea of my level of Bridgerton devotion.
Okay. Do you still have the dress? Are you going to wear it to like when the next part of the season comes up?
Oh, I do. I've been trying to find an excuse to wear it. I just haven't.
That's true. Yeah, you need someone to throw some theme parties, I think, to
wear it to the grocery store.
Exactly, yeah. It's LA. Anything goes. Okay, so let's start with what ran in your newsletter last week, where you were talking to one of the many executives who you get to kind of spill all of their secrets. And as you said, they're not always like telling you where the bodies are buried, but they're being more frank than they would be if their name was attached to it. And this ungendered person, who we do not know the identity of, got into the state of comedy development, which is also something that I talked to the creators of Hacks about last week. They were talking on the record, kind of talking more generally about the environment. Of course, they were sitting on the fact that their show had just been renewed for a 4th season, so these guys are fine. But I think they identified, Paul W. Downs and Lucia Agnello, who I was talking to, identified a real trend that comedies are kind of seen as riskier, even though as this executive you were talking to, they're also cheaper to make. So in a world where Hacks is renewed for a 4th season, Abbott Elementary is still doing pretty well. What is up with everyone being so scared of comedies? How are these things not translating?
Well, I think the backdrop of the streaming era is that everything has to travel now, right? In a way that it didn't before. It's not like you're just catering to an American audience. If you're a giant entertainment conglomerate looking to grow your subscriber base to X millions of people and you want people all around the world to watch it, well, then I don't know if a little comedy set in, I don't know, Chicago about some very specific thing with very specific Americanisms is necessarily going to fly. And I mean, it might. I mean, obviously, it's like Friends was a huge hit and it's about 6 people in New York. But I also I
assume a huge hit globally, right? Like people like Friends in Germany and China, probably.
Right. But that's one of the reasons I've been given as to why comedy's been harder, that apparently it's just harder for comedy to travel. And another part of it is I think for a while we were in this cycle where people were looking for more voice-driven things, you know, sort of what now gets termed a sadcom, like your sort of Master of None, your prestige 30-minute dramedies. And they had a real moment. But then I think the streamers took a look at the numbers and realized that, you know, they have, while critically acclaimed, a lot of these had more niche audiences than like a young Sheldon. And that's just not what they're looking for and haven't been looking for a long time. Until now, when hard, funny comedies are suddenly back in vogue, because as the TV agents I talk to tell me, people want escapist fare. People just want to laugh after the pandemic, after the strike now, now hard funny is back in. In fact, all of traditional broadcast TV is kind of back in right now. Because if you talk to people, it's like, what are we looking for? We're looking for soaps. We're looking for procedurals. We're looking for hard funny comedies. And it's like, oh, you want NBC in 1997?
Yeah, that's the Jack Donaghy 30 Rock line. Make it 1997 by science or magic.
Yes, exactly.
It's all of Hollywood strategy. Yeah, I was going to ask about that, too, because Abbott Elementary has had this pretty significant Emmy success. I think Ghosts, also from CBS, is kind of perpetually in the conversation and maybe not getting there. You know, these are shows that get critical acclaim and have, like, real numbers. I don't know. They're not 1997 NBC numbers, but they're probably being watched more than, like, pick a show on Netflix that's kind of off the top 10. So it sounds like that is what people are trying to chase. Maybe the prestige is kind of an added bonus of it. But if you can combine those two things and get some real, young Sheldon type ratings, and you're really in business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the streamers now, the ones who are looking for comedies, whether it's, Netflix or Amazon, the agents keep telling me they want hard funny. They want something that's going to appeal to as many people as possible. But then I also hear they also want them for $2 to $3 million an episode, which to a non-industry person sounds like a lot of money. But, when you break it down between the cast and the talent and the production and everything, really isn't necessarily that much. And that's a little bit of a conundrum, as this executive I was talking to in last week's newsletter told me. They were saying that you can make great single cam comedies. Like, it doesn't have to be multicam. You can do a great single cam for $1.5 to $2 million an episode, but that it's just a really big challenge. And that the old version of the low budget model was more like $750K to $1 million an episode. And that's just not really economically feasible in 2024. And, a lot of times it involves going to a state with a better tax credit.
Yeah. Well, is this not something that's an argument for taking a chance on some of those newer voices? Like Baby Reindeer is not really a comedy, but, I was thinking of that in line with Fleabag, which I'm guessing were both pretty affordable to make, at least in Fleabag's first season, because nobody's famous and it's not that technically complicated a show. So everyone's scared of voices and of doing something new, but you get these breakout successes by taking a chance on Michaela Cole with I May Destroy You or Phoebe Waller-Bridge or the team behind The Bear, and it's relatively affordable, why not take more of those gambles? Is it just because there's a lot of them that aren't working out that I'm not name checking right now?
Oh my gosh. I have this conversation all the time because it's something that baffles me. And I think, okay, there must be something that I'm not seeing, right? So when I talk to showrunners and producers and people on the studio side or TV agents, I'm like, help me reconcile this where everybody's saying, okay, we just want Network Plus. We want elevated broadcast. We want like 4-quadrant viewing, you know, all the technical terms, all the jargony terms you hear when people talk about this. And then you look at what gains acclaim, and it's your Shoguns, it's your The Bear, Beef. How do you reconcile that? And as one agent put it to me, there's no reconciling it. I can't. Like, the market wants what it wants right now because there's a certain belief that there is a safe. There are no sure bets, but there are safer bets right now. And those seem like the safer bets coming out of the last few years of consolidation, this massive M&A that's resulted in hundreds of layoffs across the corporate side. And then the strikes last year, which the industry is still recovering from. And so right now it's just only do what works. Yeah. And that's going to mean taking fewer big swings.
Yeah. Even if the audiences gets what works and they're like, oh, I've seen 5 of these Marvel shows. I'm sick of them. But then by then it's too late. You've already made 5 more and the cycle continues. Let's talk about Shogun, which when I was on the NPR show with Suzanne Watley, she was asking me about Shogun, which had just moved into the drama race. And she cited your story from a little while earlier, basically saying no one wants to make period dramas anymore. And she basically said to me, why then is Shogun a hit? And I'm like, same question. I don't know. They all have this great thing. I mean, that story that you had done, I think, came out before Shogun had maybe emerged quite as much of a hit as it is. Does a hit like Shogun steer the ship so that someone at some network is saying, okay, well, maybe we can get our own. Maybe we do want period dramas, or are they still too afraid to even follow in those footsteps?
That's a really good question, because I think one of the recurring things I hear about any hit that really has resonance today is, oh, that show wouldn't have been made today. If that were up on the development table, that show wouldn't have been greenlit in 2024. Yeah. So I think, and it's funny because I think there's a real question as to, okay, but this has all got to come back around at some point, right? Where you're going to be able to take big swings again. But yeah, in the case of Shogun, I mean, look, that was a really long gestating show. That show had been in development. I remember when I had first joined Variety back in 2019, and I had interviewed FX's John Landgraf back then, I was like, oh, and how's Shogun going? And that was 2019. That was like 5 years ago. And that had already been in some stage of development.
I feel like they were it's like early 2020. They're like, we got it. We got our cast. We're going abroad. We're going to film the whole thing. And then, we know how that turned out.
Yeah. But speaking of Landgraf, too, the thing I've heard with both Shogun and The Bear, and I think it might have been an agent who said this, where it's like the only person who could have gotten The Bear made now is the same person who made it then, who is John Landgraf. Mm-hmm. And it's you kind of get this feeling that there are certain tastemakers who are able to push things through. But that doesn't bear out for the rest of the town. And there's such an aversion to risk right now where I think there are many executives creatively who are maybe a little bit afraid to stick their head out.
I would imagine people would say something similar about Casey Bloys at HBO too, right? He's the guy who makes The White Lotus and, manages to get a hit that probably seemed too risky for somebody else to make. But yeah, there's probably a handful of them.
Yeah, there's just like a handful. And they're all names that we know because they're also high up enough on the food chain to be able to make those decisions. It's like, I wonder how many sort of mid to senior level creative execs there are out there who are like, yeah, I'm really going to go to bat for this show because I feel comfortable that even if it is a miss, that creative swing will be understood for what it is.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I followed the Emmys. To me, the Emmys seem to be all end all. And I watched something like Fleabag be a really big success and say, okay, that's going to open the door for more Phoebe Waller-Bridges to get a chance. Like, for me, I think it leads directly to I May Destroy You, for example. Does that bear out from what you know about reporting on development? Like, does awards success, even if it doesn't come to financial success, does it influence how these guys make decisions on some level? Does that lead to something new?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think cyclically what we've seen, but I also don't know if we've ever been in a time where we've been hit by both a pandemic and then a double strike. And I think the circumstances of the last couple of years have been so incredibly unique that it's hard to find a comp to like, hey, 10 years ago when we were going through this fallow period, how did it look? Or even if you look at the recession in 07, 08 and how that impacted the business, which was the last, I think, really tough economic time for the business, it's hard to even use that as a comp just because these circumstances are so different. But you got to imagine that at some point, somebody's going to come around and say, hey, it's been a while since we've had a period piece. It's been a while since we've done this. We've done a cool limited series. And if you haven't had something in a while, I think naturally, whether it's fashion, whether it's TV, these things come back around. And this sounds tangential, but it's not. But when I was at Target the other day, I saw, what was it? Cargo jeans and all the stuff that you and I wore 20 years
Crop
ago
tops.
in high school. Yeah. And it's just like, I'm sorry, this is back again. Are we going to start layering our tank tops again? Like at some point in time, the TV industry is going to be like, I think it's time for butterfly clips to make a comeback, and they're going to do it.
They are rebooting The Office on Peacock, so I do think they're following your advice there. You mentioned limited series, which I wanted to ask you about as well, because I think in your discussions with agents, there's been some hesitation around signing people up for that more than there might have been 10 years ago, where you've got like Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman like running through the Emmys with Big Little Lies. And it does feel like limited series is in kind of an identity crisis in that way, like Baby Reindeer being kind of like the big breakout from this year, which is not at all the kind of starry vehicle we're thinking of. Do you see the limited series like continuing to wane? Do you think that's another thing that's going to just make a comeback? What's the sense you get?
I get the sense that nobody wants a limited right now. That's what I keep hearing over and over again. No limited, no period, especially no expensive limited. That's a period. But it's funny because when I was in upfronts in New York a couple of weeks ago, watching NBCU's presentation, and they were showing the Peacock shows, and it was like there were 4 in a row where it was like limited, period, limited, and I was like, oh, this is the light from that star that died all those years ago that we're seeing come through. These were the things that got put on the development table in like 21, 22 that are coming to fruition. I wonder when we'll see those again, because I don't think that's what their presentation is going to look like next year.
Yeah. I mean, is it really that like if you can get, your limited series to turn into something recurring like The White Lotus, I think being a pretty good example where all of a sudden it comes back, it just to go on for longer, like business wise, that's just a better deal than having to start fresh every single time, right?
Yeah, because you think about the amount of marketing that goes into a limited series. It's like they got to start that engine all over again. They have to get the apparatus moving. And I think it's just easier, like you said, if it's something that's a known quantity and you just sort of flip the switch back on. I mean, I'm sure marketing is not that simple, but you get what I mean. Yeah. It's a little different than like creating something fresh.
Elaine, we're talking about hard-headed business stuff and Emmy strategy stuff. Like, what do you care about in this year's Emmy race? Like, what shows do you really want to throw your weight behind or want to see excel this time?
Well, you've already told me that Bridgerton is not eligible. So
just wait another year. Hold your horses.
I'm flummoxed as to who else to choose. No, but, I mean, I think it's really nice to see the success of shows like The Bear, which, again, seems to just sort of defy all of the conventional wisdom that I'm hearing right now over what's supposed to be successful and what works. Also, I just really loved Ao's speech at the last Emmys when she won. And I just want to see more of that kind of energy up on stage.
Yeah, I mean, she's such like an ascendant star. And, I think a lot of people like me are like, yeah, she's just going to go win a second Emmy like 9 months after the first one, and even beat Jean Smart, which is not really the easiest thing to do, because I think she gives great speeches like that. I mean, when you see shows like The Bear or other things thriving that you spend your day with agents telling you this will never exist, and then you see it succeed, does it make you more optimistic that this industry can every once in a while get past conventional wisdom and make something genuinely surprising?
I really think so. I mean, listen, we're in a really tough spot this year. Everybody's economically feeling it. Everybody's creatively feeling it. So there's a squeeze on all sides. And I think that's also just kind of the fundamental tension when we talk about the intersection of art and commerce, right? It's like we want people to be able to make wonderful, beautiful art that reaches people, but it also has to make millions and millions of dollars, and it has to help keep these entertainment conglomerates afloat. And that's a really tough proposition. But I think it'll come around. I mean, the phrase that keeps getting thrown around is survive till 25, and I certainly hope that bears out.
Are we just rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic in the meantime by talking about the Emmys at all?
I'm not that pessimistic.
Yeah, I really do believe in what you're saying about like having, making good art and having commerce attached to it. And to me, I think there's a trade-off. It's like if you can't make millions of dollars and keep your giant corporation afloat, you can win an Emmy. And there's some kind of intangible benefit that comes from that. Mm-hmm. I think if you said that to some of the people you interviewed, they'd probably laugh at you, but that's for me to say. And some of those guys might believe that too, right?
Yeah. I mean, listen, even the most hard-nosed, business-minded executives that I talk to who really care about the money and care about subscriber growth and all of that, I mean, so many of them do care about the art and they would love to see creatives flourish. It's just a really tricky thing to be able to do to make money. Like, what is that balance, right? Between like having art that also reaches a lot of people, that is palatable to a lot of people, which not all, quote unquote, good art does, while also making money.
Yeah. I mean, Shogun is entirely in subtitles and really violent and really long, and it reached a lot of people. So if they can do it, maybe everybody else can too.
Totally.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much for joining me, for explaining to me how the actual business part of this works and not just all of the fancy awards. We'll have you back on soon. People should subscribe to your Serious Business newsletter at The Ankler, where hopefully you're subscribing to everything else. And I'll be back in a minute with my conversation with Seth Meyers. This episode is supported by the Starz limited series Mary and George. Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine star in the scandalous true story of Mary Villiers, who molded her beautiful and charismatic son to seduce King James I. See why Salon calls it a lusty, wickedly fun gallop through history. Mary and George, for your Emmy consideration for Outstanding Limited Series and all other eligible categories. Visit starsfyc.com for more information. So now let's hear my conversation with Seth Meyers, whose show, Late Night with Seth Meyers, is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, but also first had to get through a 5-month break during the writer's strike and only came on the air in October. During the strike, Seth kept really busy. He hosted the Strike Force 5 podcast along with his fellow late night hosts, who were all people that he knew already. But I wanted to ask him about building that sense of camaraderie together during the strikes to, host this podcast to support their writers. And then going back in the Emmy race and having to compete against each other after all that. Although, of course, John Oliver beat him and his fellow hosts year after year. And it sounds like John Oliver has no trouble razzing them about that, too. And I also, of course, had to ask him about his experience as a parent of kids who are roughly the same age as mine and how he manages to do all of that and spend a lot of time watching Octonauts and also have all of these other projects. He has a monthly stand-up set in New York City alongside John Oliver and then has 2 of his own podcasts plus the one that they do of The Late Show. He hosts one show with his brother Josh Meyers and has another one looking back at the history of the group The Lonely Island with all of their digital shorts from SNL like Lazy Sunday. And it turns out that even though he is on TV and I am not, we kind of have the same reason for doing podcasts, which is that it's a way to hang out with your friends. And when your kids are taking up all of the rest of your time, not a bad tip. You might be able to guess from all this that it was a very fun and freewheeling conversation. So let's hear more from the host of Late Night with Seth Meyers, Seth Meyers. So, Seth, as we're talking, the Trump trial is probably near its completion. I would assume you know better than I do. What's your sanity level in following all of this? You're going really deep into it every night. How are you keeping your wits about you while doing this?
It's not great. And I should note it's not great because we're talking during a hiatus week.
Yeah.
And so for me, hiatuses are far tougher to get through than weeks where we actually have the show. Weeks where I have the show, because again, these world events are going to happen whether I'm doing my show or not. But when the show is on, I get to talk about the world with writers that make me laugh. And then we get to try to put it together in sort of a 12 or 15 minute piece that ultimately will be cathartic for us to do and hopefully cathartic to watch. So now it's weird to just feel like just walking around in the street muttering closer looks to myself. No way to live.
Do you ever have the like stick your head in the sand impulse about the news? Have you just like trained that out of you after all this time?
There's a little bit of that. I think it helps to have 3 young children who don't care about the news. At some point, they are a better vessel to put your energy into than events you cannot change, no matter how angry they make you.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of that. I think that just for mental health and using the off weeks to sort of restore nerve endings, that's not a bad way to go. Get the old head in the sand. Also, my kids like to go to the beach, and I hate the beach. So there I will literally just put my head in the sand.
Your head in the sand. We have kids about the same age, at least you're older too. What are they teaching you? Like, is there like a pop culture thing that you're deep in right now because of them?
Well, it was my first. I had never done the Harry Potter books.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought accurately it would be more fun to read as kids than to be one of those adults who was reading it when I was a young adult when they came out, but I still did look down my nose at people who were reading it. And then there's Octonauts. Do you know Octonauts?
Yeah, I love Octonauts.
So that is that thing, because I feel like Paw Patrol I knew existed. I didn't know anything about it, nor am I happy for knowing more about it now. There's literally
you have no choice. You just
there's nothing good about Paw Patrol.
No, not really.
Octonauts I didn't even know was a thing, and then my kids got super into Octonauts.
Yeah.
And there's a it has. I'm not a big fan of the computer animation, but, at least it teaches them about fish and stuff.
Well, the musical episode, have you gotten to that one? That's like a full hour-long musical. It is good. The song,
okay.
I mean, the songs will be in your head forever, unfortunately,
Great.
but it's really solid.
And I will say, again, you reach an age where you sort of stop watching movies for kids for the right reasons, I should know. You don't want to just be rolling into a matinee as like a sort of 39-year-old childless man. But Moana, I would say Moana is like top 5 Disney movies. Makes me cry every time I watch it, which is maybe we're over 100. So that's pretty impressive.
Because we're talking about kids, your children's book, I'm Not Scared, You're Scared, is a big part of our household. And we got it because of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which I think people don't know that much about. And I'm curious about it from your end. Like, do you get a letter from Dolly Parton? Like, what's your participation there?
What a wonderful question. You hear, when you do things like a children's book, all of a sudden these different worlds open up to you where someone sends you your editor sends an excited email telling you you've been selected for the Dolly Parton book club imagination situation. And they tell you it's a big deal. And now I should note, even if it was no deal at all, the fact that it is Dolly Parton would be enough for me to wholeheartedly agree to it. But it is very nice when things like that, you find out that is actually the way your kids, somebody's kids found out about the book.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, when I had my second kid, they were like, you should sign up for it. It's free. Like, it doesn't matter, like, your income level. You just get these books every month. And it was a big hit around here. Straight
talk, Katey, are you bummed out if your kids say they want to have it read to them? Have you read it enough that you don't want to read it anymore?
Oh, no, because it hasn't been a like every night thing. Like, it comes in, it comes out. Like, we'll be like 3 nights in a row and then we'll come back. I mean, it's like, and it's long, but it's not too long. Like, I think you struck a really good balance there. I don't know if that was the thought process.
Thank you. I've heard a few it's too longs from parents.
It's longer than some, for sure.
It's longer than some. I think that identifying as a writer, didn't want to sort of mail it in with a short one. And then I realized that most parents at the end of the night with tired kids are not judging me on whether or not I worked hard on my book. They just want to get their kids to bed.
I will say also Jimmy Fallon's book is really short. So you beat him. I don't know if that was also part of the goal.
You know, it's a very funny bit. When my first kid was born, Jimmy Kimmel sent me Jimmy Fallon's book.
It's a funny bit.
It's a good bit. And Jimmy Kimmel has a really good bit where he did the drawings. So he's the really, of all of the late night hosts, he worked the hardest on his book.
Yeah, see? I was listening back to some of Strike Force 5 because I was thinking about you kind of having that as your strike project, and then you come back and the show comes back in October. And then I guess you get to some point in like April or May where you have to start picking your Emmy episodes and like looking back onto the season that you had. Is it weird to do having had a shorter season? Like, maybe it's like the 10th least weird thing about this whole thing, but what was that like to look back?
It's always, I mean, it's mostly just weird trying to pick one episode when you are in this volume game where, you know, you're doing so many. It's hard to find one that represents everything good about your show. And so it's such a weird exercise every year, short season or long season, to say, this is the one that really shows who we are. So I think we maybe we did an episode about how when the president was on, after the episode with the president, which was our 10-year anniversary show, I went down to have photo op ice cream with him, and he was asked about the conflict in the Middle East, and I basically just got caught on camera with an ice cream cone, which is not where you want to be.
While being asked about the Middle East.
It was an interesting moment of, oh, wow, a lot of events in my life had to happen to lead me to this place where I have a salted caramel ice cream cone and the president takes one question and it's about, potential ceasefire. And I realize, this is not where should not be a 2-shot. And I just sort of tried to shuffle my way out of the shot. And then I returned to my office and already had a text from John Oliver of me on CNN saying, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen on TV. But then it was fun because it did put us in a position where, we never, obviously, we don't try to do comedy about ourselves. But because I was the most ridiculous thing that had happened that day, it was very fun to write a closer look about us. That was sort of our 10-year anniversary gift to ourselves.
Yeah.
We a lot of times on our show, I would say the gist of it is look at this dummy, and it was the first time where I was the dummy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so that's the one you wound up being able to
I think that's
select.
our submission, yeah.
Yeah.
That was certainly where we landed back when we were doing the choosing.
Yeah. I like that John Oliver feels like he can engage in some light heckling because he's like famously just whips everybody at the Emmys every single year. And last year you didn't have to compete with him, but it was Trevor Noah. Like,
yeah.
Does it feel, I assume the competition feels ridiculous for all the time because you know these guys, but after doing that podcast together, is there something extra kind of like, wait, what? Why do we have to like get thrown in an arena together?
It was nice. I think there was the gift of the podcast was realizing how ridiculous it is. Mm-hmm. In a good way. Yeah. Which is, this is the real fun of having one of these shows is obviously the luxury of getting to do one every day. But then, having built better friendships with the other people that we are, ultimately, I guess, in competition, putting that in quotes with every year. It was really kind of cool. It was also so fun and funny to us that John left the category, and then when Trevor won, every one of us was like, so we were second place every year. Okay.
Like third, fourth.
Yeah. It was, okay. Oh, all right.
And I guess he'll just go and he beats SNL now, like he
beats SNL now. So now Lauren and I finally have something in common. I will say, John and I have been doing monthly. We have a residency at the Beacon Theater where we do stand up together one Sunday a month, which is again another thing that happened that came out of the strike, one of the silver linings. And a few Sundays ago, we do a Q&A. And the first question was, congratulations to both of you for your Writers Guild nominations. John, you just won. How does that feel? And so it's just, I was like, look, I knew you were going to win, but did I have to find out in front of 3,000 people? Did I have to?
I wanted to ask you about the stand-up thing because it's a similar muscle to what you have on like being on a late night show, but also when you're on your show, you are the boss. You are managing a whole bunch of people. And I think you get that feeling while watching the show. There's the writers, there's all the people around you. Is stand-up kind of a break from being the boss to being like just you on stage? Is there an element of that?
Yeah, I think there is. You don't feel as taken care of. Weirdly, as a boss, I don't think of my day, certainly the longer I do it, as, I have all these people I have to manage. It's more like, look at this. I have all these people who are taking care of me. I have to make so many fewer decisions than I thought I would have to make when I, embarked on this a decade ago. And so really when I think about stand-up, it's almost like, all right, buddy, let's see what happens for an hour when you make all the choices. And so, and again, it's not out of laziness, but I feel like certain muscles atrophy when you're surrounded by the talent I am. And so forcing yourself to go out once a month and forcing yourself to go out with somebody as good as John too, right? You're not going to mail it in when you're doing a two-hander with somebody of his caliber.
Do you feel like you'd rather do it with somebody than on your own? Does that teamwork element help you?
I do it on my own all the time. And I will say it's so lovely. I'm less stressed. I always get stressed before I do a stand-up show because I think when you're standing backstage, the very idea that people, and especially now that I have kids and I know what it takes to leave the house, when it dawns on you that people left the house, they parked a car, maybe they got dinner, they had to get a sitter, and now all they're getting is me talking. You know what I mean? There's no special effects. It's just, and so that's the part that stresses me out the most. Whereas when I'm with John, I feel a little bit like, okay, worst case, they like John.
It's like a 2-for-1 deal. Like you can balance each other out.
There you go.
I mean, you've got 3 kids, but you've also got 2 other podcasts in addition to Strike Force 5, which is over.
Yes.
And as someone who's also has a podcast and also has kids, do you do these podcasts as a way to hang out with your friends because it's hard to hang out with your friends when you have kids?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad to
I shouldn't say that wasn't why we started them, but it's been why they're worth doing. Especially the craziest thing about doing one with my brother, who I would have told anybody who asked a year ago before we started it, oh yeah, he's my best friend. And then if you said, how often do you see him? I would say, barely. And then you'd say, how often do you talk to him? And I'd say, like once a week for 5 minutes. And so he and I haven't, even though it's all via Zoom because he's West Coast and I'm East Coast, but this is the most we talked to each other since I think we were in college together. So that's been just great. And then, as far as the Lonely Island podcast, it's just so rare for me to see any of those guys and to actually get to be with all 3 of them at once. It's just, and again, it's one of the happiest times of my life.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, I should know when I say it's one of the happiest times of my life. I think all of us are aware that we forget how stressful and awful it was, but it is, to look back on the success of it with hindsight has been really nice.
On the podcast you do with your brother, you guys have guests who come in, and it's obviously different from interviewing people that you do on your show. But like, I love interviewing people. I love talking to people, but it also like it wears me out after a while to like prepare to talk to someone. Do you not have that? Can you just like interview anybody at any time and feel ready to go?
Again, on the show, I would be very stressed out without the infrastructure of researchers and segment producers and feeling very taken care of. Also, it's rare to talk to somebody for longer than 15 minutes on a talk show. So that time fills pretty quickly. I'm never sitting at my desk thinking, oh, brother, we're going to be short tonight. Whereas with the podcast, and especially with Josh, we have decided to try to talk to people about stuff they maybe haven't talked about anywhere else, which is, their family trips. And, when you just use that as a jumping off point and knowing that I have my brother there as well, I am not that stressed. I do think I also should say, I do think I've gotten better at talking to people thanks to talking to people for a job.
Yeah.
It's amazing what, that'll do for you.
Because like Update prepares you for some elements of the show, but the interview thing, there wasn't really any equivalent for it before you took over the show, right?
No. And I think also people falsely thought maybe there was because in their head, they would say, well, I saw him interview Stefan.
Was Stefan.
And though I would say, like, based on how those went, you would say I was terrible at interviewing. But yeah, that was, of all the skills that I feel as though I've improved at, that was the one where I started farthest away from where I am now.
So other than like the research and the prep you have doing it, what do you think has made the biggest difference in 10 years?
I try to keep an ear open for opportunities to maybe diverge from whatever the plan was. Yeah. And I think I think you have to have a plan, but at the same time, you have a plan to sort of like make sure you've raised the floor for what the interview can be. But at the same time, if you see somebody who might be willing to talk about some tangential thing that came up in an answer about something else, and they have a sort of light in their eyes to go there, then you sort of jump at that chance.
Yeah. So you have to know it in the moment, really, like whether or not this person's going to go with you.
Yes. Whereas I feel as though when I first started doing the show, when the interview was over, I feel as though my goal was to say, that's how I thought that would go. Good job, Seth. Whereas now I try to, the reality is if I can be surprised, the audience will be surprised. And I think they like that. So
do you ever misjudge and like try to get someone to go with you and then they can't follow you?
Yeah. I mean, the good news is, I'm pretty strong at getting back on track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you re-signed your contract like a month ago, or even like not even a month ago. How much when you do something like that and kind of say, okay, here's the next 4 years of my life, do you try to like see into the future and see what you're going to want in 4 years? Like, what do you look for when saying, okay, I'm in for longer?
First, I would just say that the years go faster. I know now how quickly it'll go. And I think when I started, I think my first deal was 3 years, and that seemed like a lifetime.
Yeah.
Now, again, by the end of my time at SNL, I had a sense that I wasn't going to get fired. But at the beginning of my time at SNL, I really was thinking year by year. I certainly felt as though I was being evaluated.
Yeah.
Constantly. And that was that was true.
Well, that's a true fact of working there.
That's
Everyone
a true
feels
fact,
that way.
right?
Yeah.
I was not in my head about that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of know how quickly the years go. And I also know that, reinvention can kind of happen when you're not planning on it either. I mean, we've kind of been forced into a few reconfigurations of the show through COVID and then the strike.
Sure.
And wanting to make sure when you look back at a year, you can see the difference. Whereas we don't have big meetings about like, how is the show going to be different in, September? It's more that you want to make sort of small choices that lead to noticeable change every 6 months. But it's, I will tell you this, like there was nothing else I thought, as I was talking to the network, there was nothing else I was thinking, oh, I'd rather do this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think the network knew. And so it was it was a tough situation. When I said, I'm going to walk, they were like, to where? And I was like, you guys are right.
Well, there's got to be an appeal. I mean, you've reported to work in the same building for quite a while now. Like, clearly that is a thing that works for you. Like, being a comedian can be a really inconsistent job, and you have found the, like, actual office job version of it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, feeling like you get to play a home game every night is really special.
Yeah.
Here, I'm going to do, that's my first ID photo.
Wow.
Is me from 2001.
It's fuzzy. It has like a vague Pete Davidson vibe about it without actually focusing
I
in.
used to be, there was a day, Katey, when I was Pete Davidson. I mean, sure, not without the starlets. It was pretty boring.
No tattoos. I don't think.
No tattoos. What? Pete Davidson without the girlfriends or the tattoos. How does that appeal to anybody?
It's totally same vibe.
Peacock? No, it's a pass.
He had his turn on Peacock. He's going around. Okay. You were saying about how you want the show to be different, a year later. How do you think now that the strike, you've been back from the strike for 6 months or so, how do you think the strike changed the show?
I just think there was just a sincere appreciation from everybody who works here as to how fortunate we are to have this show.
Sure.
You go 5 months without it, and it's not just losing a creative outlet. It's, using a support system. And we're all, we all rely on each other, not just for jokes and show infrastructure. Our personal lives are really dependent on this being a place as well. So, that is how I would describe this last. I mean, my math is going to be a little wonky, but what are we? 8 months post-strike?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
about right. But that's just been a nice time for the show, and obviously, everybody here is excited about the fact that we get to keep doing it. Yeah.
Do you feel like you go in, like when you come back from strike, is it 5 months of pent-up jokes, or does it take a while to build up?
I don't think anybody. The nice thing about any joke that was pent up is going to be bad by the time you get back. You know what I mean? Like,
you got to start fresh.
I mean, and that's kind of one of the ways this show I think for everybody involved with it, started enjoying it more was when we realized most of the best stuff we're going to do is going to be written the day of. Mm-hmm. And so for procrastinators, that is a nice outcome.
Yeah. And I assume at this point that doesn't scare you, that you wake up every morning and you know you got to build something from scratch. Like that is how you work.
Yeah. It took a while to get there, certainly. And it took a while to, I enjoy my weekend now. The first 2 years of the show, if Thursday stunk, I would just stew in it. And now I realize it doesn't. First of all, one of the things is they don't stink anymore. We haven't had a bad Thursday since 17. I remember it well. No, but you just realize, like the people who watch this show, the people who engage with it, there's a certain expectation they have that we try to hit and exceed, and they're not judging it show by show anymore.
And you're not judging it show by show.
Right. You just realize that's kind of one of the real upsides of the amount of real estate you have when you get one of these daily shows. Yeah.
To circle back to Trump from the beginning, unfortunately, sorry. But that's when you had Kimmel on your show a little while ago, you guys were kind of just talking about acknowledging the fact that like he hates you, like personally, like he knows who you are and hates you. Do you ever have to kind of like step back for a second and be like, that's bizarre that I have found myself in this place?
Yes, it is bizarre. The whole thing's bizarre. And I, another interesting, I don't talk to my kids about politics.
Sure.
However, my kids grow up my kids are growing up in Manhattan. They hear things. They don't like Donald Trump.
Sure.
Based on things they hear. And at one, and I still haven't told them the story about he actually really doesn't like Daddy.
You did not take them back to 2011 just yet. You're gonna
I'm like, I'll wait a little bit on that. But yeah, it's so bizarre, and it's such a bizarre thing because his hatred is born out of a thing I was really, to this day, very proud of, both in the collective writing of and the execution of. And it's such a strange night now to, my relationship looking back on it's such a trip. But at the
we're talking about the Correspondence Dinner, just to be clear for anybody who's listening.
And I just want your listeners to pretend that behind me there's just multiple photos of it, and I've just been pointing at it, and that's why Katey
a lot of red string connected to each other.
But the other weird thing is, I get asked a lot of times, when I do a Q&A at our tapings, people say, do you regret it? And it's, I maybe would if it's not like while we were preparing for it, someone ever said, FYI.
Yeah.
You could certainly do these jokes, but a likely outcome.
Not just possible, he's president. Likely.
He's president by 2016. FYI. Well, who knows? One day I'll have to explain it to my kids. My dad loves it, I will say, in a way that makes me very happy.
I do think I'm not the only regular person who would love the power to get under his skin, as much as he's bothered me over the years. So I do think there's something to relish there that hopefully sometimes comes up.
Yeah. I would say, quite a few are under his skin, and it might give it its lumpy quality. But I certainly would rather he was elsewhere, as opposed to on TV every day.
Yeah, and we're,
unless it was a limited series, if I would happily, it would be great. I think it'd be great.
Then we'd have to consider it at the Emmys and figure out where to put it. And it'd be very complicated.
I do think he'd trade it all for an Emmy. Everybody's like, it was my fault. If you guys had just given him an Emmy for The Apprentice.
That's a really good point, actually.
What about you, Emmy voters?
All right, I'm going to
hang this all on me.
Speak that truth to that power. You got to see what they can do. I don't know why I'm
trying to antagonize Emmy voters. No, it's my fault. I'm so sorry.
All right, I'm going to throw out a kind of weird question as we wrap this up. So I interviewed Maya Rudolph last week, and I was listening to her on Armchair Expert to kind of prepare for it. And she was talking about how Amy Poehler is really into Enneagrams, the personality typing things.
Yeah.
Has she given you your Enneagram number?
Yeah, but I don't remember it. I don't remember the outcome.
That's always the problem with those things.
But Poehler has long been trying, on behalf of her friends, trying to find the secrets of both the universe and our identities, and we're very lucky. The first person who made me happy about my zodiac sign was Poehler, because there were things I would do at SNL that I liked. And she would point at me and go, Capricorn,
Oh,
Capricorn.
I thought you might be a Capricorn based on you saying you had mixed feelings about your. I have a Capricorn child, and yeah, they get a bad rap.
I know, but she made me feel good about my Caps, and now and I live in a house with 3 Aries, and mercifully we just added a Scorpio, I think.
Yeah, you need some balance in the household.
Yeah, no, I mean it was a disaster when it was me and 3 Aries.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Prestige Junkie podcast. The show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Elaine Low. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week. This episode is supported by the Starz limited series Mary and George, the scandalous true story starring Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine. CY Salon calls it a lusty, wickedly fun gallop through history. For your Emmy consideration, visit starsfyc.com for more information.